Good afternoon, everyone. This is Institute, along with the Community Technical Assistance Center and Managed Care Technical Assistance Center of New York State. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is called Empowering Recovery and Resilience with Mindfulness, presented by our CTech NIAPRIS partner, Ruth Cullen-Wagner. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to orient you to our WebEx system. For those of you that haven't been with us before, welcome. And this is our WebEx system in which we'll be presenting today's webinar. Upon joining, you are going to be placed on mute just so that there's no background noises so that everybody can listen and participate in today's presentation. If you have any technical issues, we're going to ask you to chat to the host, whose name is Fung, and she will be able to assist you. You're going to have an opportunity to participate with us by using the chat box feature. So I may be chatting to you during the presentation to solidify some of Ruth's thoughts, and she's going to ask a few questions from you. So you can submit your answers in the chat box feature, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you don't see it, if you hover at the bottom, there's a blue bubble, like a thought bubble, and that's also your chat box feature that you can click on that and it'll pop up to the right. So without further ado, I will now pass it on to Ruth Cullen-Wagner, who is a social worker, and she's the Director of Training and Development at NIAPRIS, where she's been working for several years. Ruth, please further introduce yourself to our participants and begin your wonderful presentation. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you to the cast and crew and everyone at CTech and MCTech. I really appreciate you helping me to put this together for our webinar today. That's a picture of me, and that is all the lovely stuff. You know, it's been 30 years. I'm definitely not going to read that to you, and it's there for your information if you choose to read it, and if you don't, it's okay. But it's pretty amazing just thinking how time goes by so quickly. I've been in the field for 30 years, and you know, for most of that time, I've never practiced mindfulness, most of it. And now, in the last several years, and more specifically, even most recently, I really consider myself a student of mindfulness. I learned it years ago while I was trained as a dialectical behavioral therapist. And you know, I wasn't quickly warmed up to it, and I'll speak more about my experiences with mindfulness as we keep going through the presentation. So this is the organization that I work for, New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. We also just call ourselves NIAPRIS because our name is really long. We are an organization of people who use and also of those who provide mental health services. And we're dedicated to improving services and the social conditions for people with psychiatric disabilities. And we do this by promoting their recovery, their rehabilitation, and their rights. So we all know that there are many health benefits with mindfulness, but that also includes the promotion of recovery and resiliency. So today we're going to focus on empowering resilience and mindfulness techniques, and we're going to include journaling as well as some other practices. We will define and describe mindfulness, what the research has to say about it and its ability to help us cope, and to recover from a range of physical, emotional, and psychological issues, and its potential for our overall wellness. We're going to learn tools for successfully introducing mindfulness to the people that we work with, overcoming some obstacles to engaging people in these practices, and also we're going to utilize some concrete skills for applying mindfulness to your life as well as to your work. All right, so this is actually a question that I do not want you to answer. Right now, I don't want you to answer it. We're going to present this question again at the end of the webinar. And essentially, throughout the 1 hour we have together, I want you to think about this question. What is one way you would like to incorporate mindfulness into your personal and professional life? Simple question. We'll get to that again at the end of our presentation. Okay, so when I first heard of mindfulness, I was like, what? You said what? I didn't even understand the definition. So I learned since then, not to judge myself too harshly. You see, I'm a really concrete and logical thinker. And for me, this really just came out of left field. It was a bit too nebulous. You may not have heard of mindfulness before. You may not know what it is, or you may even have a general idea of what it is, or you may even be mindfully proficient, and I envy you. Mindfulness has gained widespread attention, but many have really different ideas of what it is and how it can be practiced. And so there are some people who are intimidated or turned off by the concept, and that was me in the very beginning. Maybe, like me, you imagine someone sitting in a yoga position, and I'm like, there's no way I can cross my legs that way. I equated mindfulness with that physical ability, and that is not what mindfulness is. So I was one of those people, and I'm now finding the virtues, of being mindful. And I'll speak a little bit more about that throughout our time together. The point is that mindfulness should be made available to everyone and not just people who can assume that lotus position. Mindfulness is a useful life tool and even has the potential to help people find and maintain recovery. And it helps them to practice resiliency when they're faced with challenges. So to help us understand it more clearly, I took the definition of mindfulness from John Kabat-Zinn, and he is actually the developer of what is widely used mindfulness-based stress reduction, also known as MBSR. So please excuse me, but I'm going to be reading this to you. Mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So to distill this down even further, mindfulness at its essence is simply being present. This means paying attention to what's happening right now, without judgment, without overthinking it, without invalidating your experience. Mindfulness just being willing to show up in the moment and to accept the present. And it sounds simple, but in all honesty, most of us spend only a very small fraction of our day being mindful. We're usually mired in thoughts of our past or mired in thoughts of our future. Okay, I love this picture. So I bet we're all familiar with what it feels like to be that character on the left-hand side with a busy mind bubble. And it's not just you, it's the majority of us. We spend most of our lives there. But we do have moments on the right, taking in the world around us, not having the mind full, but being mindful of the world around us, the beauty of the environment, nature, a loved one, something we perceive as special. I once had someone ask, a bit snottily, I think, well, I live in New York City. What beauty is there to admire? Well, they asked the wrong question. I grew up and was raised in New York City, born and raised, and there's plenty of beauty in New York City. The beauty and architectural wonders of the city, the skyline, the trees. There's so many trees in New York City. You can't even believe it when you think about, but it's a city, right? The Gothic architecture of some of the older buildings, the fragrances coming out of bakeries, the coffee shops, smelling coffee when you walk by those shops. But being mindful is not just taking in the beauty around you. While it is part of it, and it helps you to practice being in the moment, you stop and you focus to yourself. You can, stop and focus to yourself and say, where am I right now? You're stopping yourself. You're stopping your mind from thinking from the past or to the future and say, where am I right now? Stay in the moment. You stop and you focus. Notice where you are and how you feel and what's in front of you. Who's in your life? Doesn't have to be physically right in front of you, but thinking. You're focusing in the now. Who's in your life that you love? Who's in your life that loves you? That is mindfulness, bringing it to the present. And I absolutely love this. It's the refocusing whenever your mind wanders to the past or to the future. We don't naturally spend too much time in the present. We ruminate about our past errors. We think about our futures. And research shows that we spend a lot of our time being hopeful about the future instead of making this one moment the very best that it can be. And it just sort of makes sense. If we work on making this one moment the best that it can be, our hope for the future there will be a hopeful future, because we at every given moment are being present. We're doing the very best that we can be to be mindful. I also wanted to say, this picture is not 100%, although I love it. But mindfulness is not about that character on the right, about clearing your mind. I've had that one experience for 1 nanosecond in my entire life, which I will also talk about today. But it's really not about clearing our minds or zoning out or blissfully disassociating. But it's more about being present to whatever comes. And when your mind wanders, to acknowledge it, don't judge yourself, and then bring yourself back to the present moment. Now, here is where things are going to get a little technical, and I'm going to do my best to not get into too much of the weeds here. This is empirically supported benefits of mindfulness, and I've got a lot of information, research study this, research study that. I have everything in the references, so please feel free to look everything up, but I do want to review some of this with you. Research has found that there is reduced rumination. So several studies say that mindfulness reduces rumination. In one study in particular, people experienced a decreased negative affect. That's always good, as well as fewer depressive symptoms, always good, and less rumination. They also had significantly better working memory. I really could use me some of that. And they were able to stay and pay attention during tasks that they were performing. The second one is easy, stress reduction. It's well known that mindfulness supports stress reduction. And it boosts working memory, the improvements to working memory, and in our ability to focus our attention and suppress those distracting thoughts and distracting information that comes our way. Other findings suggest that mindfulness meditation shifts, I love this, our ability to use emotion regulation strategies in a way that enables us to experience emotions selectively. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And that the emotions we experience may actually be processed differently in our brains. And I don't know if you know this, but mindfulness is used as the core skill as part of dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, and that's an evidence-based model created by Dr. Marsha Linehan. Okay, so let's see. Less emotional reactivity. Researchers have found that mindfulness meditation practice help people disengage from emotionally upsetting situations. Mindfulness meditation may also give cognitive flexibility. In our field, sometimes we use the term baseline, someone who's having a newer or unfortunately lower baseline as a result of their continued illness or hospitalization or, some sort of setback. And this particular study showed that people who practice mindfulness have greater cognitive flexibility, and thus they recover faster after, being negatively impacted. So for the people we work with, this mindfulness is absolutely beneficial to their recovery. They gain the ability to bounce back. It's wonderful. Other studies, before we move on, have proven relationship satisfaction, as well as increased immune functioning, overall improvement to our well-being, reduction in psychological distress, increased information processing speed, and that's wonderful for all of us, especially as we get older and older, and to decrease task effort and increase our ability to focus. Going to have a little bit more of this discussion now. We've got mindfulness and the body, and so how mindfulness practice affects us physically. And we just in the previous slide, we discuss some research that actually proves that. And here we're just going to discuss some other ones, and I won't get into the weeds of it either. But essentially, our brain structure. And it's associated with 8 brain regions to introspection and awareness, memory, self-control, emotion regulation, etc. And the interesting, communication between both hemispheres. Interesting. Okay. I didn't know about that. I didn't think we needed or that we had a lack of communication between both hemispheres. But yes, according to research, we do, and mindfulness helps with this. It supports cardiovascular health. So the research shows that people who engage in mindfulness activities actually have healthier hearts and healthier lungs. Immune functioning. And then this one's interesting. The reduced markers of inflammation correlated with decreased immune functioning. That's usually correlated to reduced immune functioning and disease. And then there's the helper cells. It increases those, and they increase the, let me say this right, telomerase. I think I'm saying that right. They increase the telomerase activity, which promotes the stability of our chromosomes and the prevention of its deterioration. So since mindfulness has been making its way more and more into the mainstream, we hear about it, we know many people who practice it, we really have learned how important it is, the physical health to the mental health, and we learned about vice versa, the importance of mental health to physical health. And so we can't separate the mind from the body or the body from the mind. And I remember years and years ago, because remember, I've been doing this for a long time, that in school, it really was almost something to be proud of, you know. We work with people from the neck up. Well, we were in error. We don't. We work with the entire person, the fullness of everyone, and that means mind, body, and soul. So we can't separate the mind from the body. They function together. They're interconnected in very complex ways, as are the people we work with, as are we, and thankfully science has begun to prove all of that. Okay, so after all that research and boring mumbo jumbo, I felt that it was time for some fun. So I pulled out all the stops for you, and I went straight to a reliable source. I went to dummies.com. And according to them, resilience is a collection of qualities that allow people to adapt to change, deal with challenges, and bounce back from hardship. Resilience is generally defined as the ability to properly adapt to stress and adversity. As a human being, we're born with this capacity, though, of course, some people have it in greater measure than others. The best thing is that you can cultivate it with practice. And so it's not necessarily a personality trait. It's a way of paying attention, of thinking, and we can each practice it and learn from it and be able to bounce back better and better from adverse situations. So this is a quote from Billy Ray Chitwood, and he says, in my childhood, ate some emotional soup, and I've been trying all my life to digest it. So when something bad happens, how long does it take you to recover? How long does it take the people you work with to recover? Some rebound more quickly than others, and neuroscientists are just beginning to actually measure that bounce back time, and that'd be very interesting to see. So this is a picture of emotional soup. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any soup that looked ugly. That soup actually looks delicious, but emotional soup, let's take a stressful event. Follow that stressful event with negative thoughts. They could be self-negative thoughts about others and about the situation, and that brings upon a traumatic experience, and here it's labeled as emotional soup. So the emotional soup that follows that stressful event, that whips up the negative stories we were just talking about that are not helpful to us. And sometimes those negative stories go on and on and on. That's the emotional soup. That's the thick mire of that soup. And it goes on and on beyond the point of being useful. So mindfulness reduces this rumination, and when we practice mindfulness regularly, it actually changes our brain so that we're more resilient to future stressful moments. Remember, we just talked about how you can cultivate resiliency through practice. Well, you can also cultivate mindfulness with practice. So it's a perfect combination to helping us to reduce rumination and to regulate our emotions, and essentially to find recovery and to bounce back quicker from our adverse experiences. Many of us lead busy lives. I love this little picture here. Yeah, many days I feel like that. So many of us lead busy lives without time to consider, that, and to recognize that our minds are wandering. We're constantly from one task to the other. And while we manage our work, then we are managing our home situations, and sometimes we're doing both everywhere, right? You're at work and you're managing home through the phone, through emails, and you're at home and you're doing work. So these thoughts, these negative thoughts, these stressful cognitive moments create a negative pattern and make us that we think we're even more stressed than we are. So it's a very interesting combination. So yes, we are stressed, but then our rumination about all of it makes us even more stressed. So by developing mindfulness and engaging in mindfulness practices, we can bring resources to our thinking process. We can develop what they call personal resilience. So what is that? It's how people respond to problems and stress. They respond differently depending on how resilient a person is. So resilience is the capacity for an individual to thrive, to keep going, to struggle through, or, in the face of the stressor, just to keep going. And so resilient people, they're able to deal with problems calmly without falling into a state of despair that others may do that. Do you know the person I'm talking about? Do you have someone in mind as I'm describing this person who really is very resilient? And it doesn't mean that they're unfeeling or that they're cold, but just that they're able to remain strong in times of crises. They're self-compassionate, and that's a feature of people who are resilient. And you know what? They're also compassionate to people, to other people. So it's interesting because there's a mindfulness exercise, and that helps people with self-compassion and compassion for others. And we're actually going to talk about that in a little bit. But that brings about resiliency in a person's time of distress. So how do we increase our resilience? When something challenging happens, how well do you recover? How well do the people you work with recover? And, of course, due to the unpredictability of life, things are always going to happen, the joys and the sorrows. And resilient people, those people we're describing, they're able to greet challenges and difficulties and even see it as an opportunity for self-reflection, for learning, and for personal growth. So how do we increase our resilience? There's a quote here. I bounce back from setbacks, and if things don't go according to plan, I make another plan. That's fantastic. That's a person constantly moving it forward. Here's another one. Mindful people can better cope with difficult thoughts and emotions without becoming overwhelmed or shutting down, emotionally, that is. There's a recent study that highlights the link between mindfulness and resilience. And it says mindful people, I just read that. I'm so sorry. Let me finish that. So when you observe the mind, it helps us to resist getting stuck. So yes, you're engaging in those mindful activities, helping us to cope with those difficult thoughts. And the more and more we do it, we're retraining our brain, and that helps to empower us and move us forward. And the life stresses, they're subjective and they're different to different people. But with mindfulness and with focusing on the moment, we all have the ability then, with that sort of perspective, to respond with wisdom and, versus reacting in a way that's harmful to ourselves or to the people around us. So when do you feel or have felt the most present? The present moment is the field on which the game of life happens. Eckhart Tolle is like the father of mindfulness, and he has a book called The Power of Now, and it's really a wonderful read. So when when have you felt the most present? Think about it. How might you describe that experience? When do you tend to feel the most disconnected or disassociated? And one thing that I love about the idea of being in the present moment is really that connection to our emotions. It's controlling the emotion versus experiencing the emotion. And so one of the most important points about mindfulness is that, yes, we all know it's very difficult. Our brains, especially mine, are hardwired to make judgments, to time travel. All the time, I'm in the past or I'm in the future. Create stories, and it's really a way, in a way, working to be mindful works against the biology of what naturally happens in our brains. And nobody is perfect at this. So luckily, we don't need to be perfect at it. We can experience a real benefit of mindfulness when we notice we're not being mindful and choose then not to be judgmental and to turn our minds back to the now. That's mindfulness. That is practicing presence, knowing that our mind wanders and bringing it back. Recognizing when we're not being mindful. If we get distracted 1,000 times, we have 1,000 opportunities to notice and shift our attention. The more we practice, the easier it becomes to recognize, when our mind has, quote unquote, left the building. And each time we practice, we gain a little bit more clarity and a little bit more control and ease to be able to just float back to the present. Mindfulness is so powerful that the fact that it comes out of Buddhism is irrelevant, and that's John Kabat-Zinn. So how can we introduce mindfulness in a way that isn't met with resistance from some people that we work with, especially when they may equate it with religion or even recognize that it's more secular now, at least in this country, and that might be offensive to some. And so think about the people that you work with. If we take mindfulness out of its spiritual history and context, that might be undesirable to some people because they want to connect mindfulness to spirituality. But for other people, separating mindfulness from spirituality actually can help open up a path for them to practice mindfulness and practice it in a way that fits their own belief system, brings about improvement in health and well-being. Some people say, that mindfulness has become too removed from its spiritual and philosophical roots. What was once a powerful philosophical and ethical discipline intended to help free people from greed, free people from ill will and delusion, now has become just what someone says, another just mass-marketed self-fulfillment tool. And, we don't want it to be that. There's so many of those out there. This doesn't need to fit into that category, and that is my belief. So these people believe that mindfulness has become commodified, monetized, corporatized even, and it's now a therapized phenomenon. It has benefits, so we're going to use it if people choose to use it. And that has really lost its way from the modern Western world and the way they practice, the Eastern practices, mindfulness. And what's really interesting is mindfulness in this country, really around the world, but I'm going to stick to this country, has taken root in our schools, primary, secondary, high schools, colleges, all educational academic institutions and various universities have begun doing this because they recognize, we talked about all the benefits of mindfulness. They recognize those benefits, including the stress reduction, the being present in the here and the now, and the refocusing your mind to the present. So all that is extremely very helpful. Of course, the cognitive flexibility, all that is highly beneficial to every person in this country. All right, of course, healthcare, we know this, and not only psychotherapy, but all of healthcare is recognizing the benefits of mindfulness. Even us, let's think about our employee assistance programs, our EAPs. That is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. That is now a benefit to many of those EAP programs where the employees can now practice with a counselor mindfulness activities. The U.S. military is doing this. Prisons are doing this. Sports teams are doing this. The corporate world is doing this. So mindfulness is just showing up, not just showing up in business schools, and they are Harvard, New York University, Stern, Georgetown University, McDonough, but it's also in a number of corporations, newer corporations, and newer being relative for some of you younger folks out there, Apple, Facebook, eBay, Google, Twitter, and Yahoo, but also the more traditional, older stalwarts of these of large corporations, like Hughes Aircraft, General Mills, Abbott Laboratories, General Motors, the Ford Motor Company, AOL Time Warner, Reebok, Xerox, IBM, Safeway, Procter & Gamble, Texas Instruments, and Goldman Sachs. They are all practicing mindfulness and as a benefit to their employees. So regardless of people's opinions, the roots of mindfulness practice, whether it's religion or if you want to practice it secularly, regardless, it is beneficial to our mental and physical health. So remember we spoke about some of the obstacles that people think or they might feel about this kind of practice. However, you don't have to use the word mindfulness, and please, it's not that we want to trick anyone, but introduce it into your work organically and then introduce it around the person's presenting problem. Mindfulness practice can be shaped around the person's pain. So it's not that we're hiding it, we're just helping the person with it and then teach them about it, how they can do that independently. So here's an example. You work with someone who's drinking too much, and then you ask, what are you feeling right before you pick up that bottle of alcohol? And they may respond, I don't know. This creates a state of curiosity. And you would say, would you be willing to do a little experiment in the coming week? When you notice that you're reaching to get a bottle of wine, just stop for that moment. Take a breath and ask yourself, what do I feel? This is a mindfulness exercise wrapped around a person's presenting problem. You're not asking them to get in a lotus position. You're not doing a 4, 5, 6 breathing exercise. You're not, doing guided meditation. You're actually asking that person, in this moment, I want you to be in the present. Be in the present and think about, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling in that moment where you're going to engage in that behavior that now has you've self-identified as an issue? So if people don't relate to that, stay within the frame that's naturalistic or materialistic. It's best presented as an attentional control teaching, right? So you're bringing your mind back, attentional control teaching mind, and to focus on an object. This is the best thing for me when I'm doing a mindfulness activity and I'm focusing on an object. That just always helps me to actually be mindful. And we can use language that's secular to create safety. So not too touchy-feely. Those are my words, not too touchy-feely. So bring up neuroscience studies. We talked about many studies today. Bring those studies up and show the profound impact on people's well-being. That may allow a person to think, yes, I'm curious. Let's see. Let's start exploring some of that. And to pique their interest. You can talk about its potential, introduce it as a gift, and of course it's voluntary. I've always equated mindfulness as just too touchy-feely, too hokum, something that other people did. Flower children from the 70s, New Age people, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just not me. I'm very practical, like I said. And I'm even more religious, and I'm less spiritual. So that part of mindfulness just doesn't connect with me. But about 8 years ago, when I was trained to become a DBT therapist, part of DBT, as I shared earlier, is mindfulness as the foundation for all of the other skills being taught in DBT. And I could not find mindfulness. You see, I thought it was a state of being. I thought it was a destination of sorts. And I was really judging myself way too harshly. I berated myself for not being able to do this one simple thing. And at the time, there was only 1 nanosecond of one mindfulness exercise where I found, there goes that destination again, but I didn't really understand mindfulness at the time, where I thought I found mindfulness. And it was during a chocolate mindfulness exercise. And of course, it would have to be related to food, where I find mindfulness. So for that 1 nanosecond in time, my thoughts focused on the texture and the taste of the chocolate. And I left all other thoughts behind. And that was such a beautiful thing. But you know what I think about now? I don't think that was really mindfulness, because I was looking at it as a destination. And mindfulness is the journey of being in the now. So focusing on the present, focusing on the texture of the chocolate in my mouth. Yes, that's mindfulness. Expecting not to have anything else in my mind that was not. So mindfulness is the art of, I can't stop thinking about tomorrow or yesterday, because I'm going to focus on the now. Constantly redirecting yourself to the now. So you can share your experience as you introduce these techniques to the people that you work with. It normalizes life for them. They're not different. You're not different. This is something that we have in common. We have life in common. We have stress in common. And to reduce stress, these are some things that we can do. And at this moment, it's not on your slide, but I do want to bring up trauma-sensitive mindfulness. And the goal, the primary goal, is for a person to feel safe throughout all mindfulness activities. And it's recommended that you can help the person practice those activities in a very safe manner. So we've heard, you may or may not have heard, but we've generally heard that mindfulness can be a trigger. And, that's a whole process, a practice of trauma-sensitive mindfulness. So I encourage you to find more information about that, because I'm not going deep into this. But just to know that mindfulness can help trigger, those feelings of fight or flight, or even freeze. And so by becoming more aware of your feelings through practice, right, you can identify what those feelings are when you begin to feel the fight or flight or the freeze. And over time, through practicing mindfulness in a very safe and comfortable way, you can then learn to change those responses so that you're not knee-jerking your response from feeling to trigger, right? From feeling to fight, from feeling to flight, or from feeling to freeze, that you can interrupt that cycle and then learn how to change it, because you're now becoming more aware. And again, I do recommend that you Google that if that's something that you're interested in. And this is in your tool packet that I'm hoping that you will download. And it's essentially just some very simple examples of mindfulness-based interventions that you can practice with the people that you work with. And so I won't go through all of these, but if we look at the bottom one, I really think this is really so beneficial. It's the benefit of interpersonal benefits. And so where the therapist and the person can practice mindfulness meditation together during their sessions together. And then what happens? You have informal daily practice, and that can include you and the person you're working with can do mindfulness by walking, eating, meditating, and even mentally saying, lifting, what does that say? Lifting, stepping forward, heel, touch, right? So that walking exercise, you're combining it with words. So lifting the leg, I'm stepping forward, my heel is touching, my toes touching, I'm lifting, et cetera, et cetera. So you're doing the verbal commands as you're walking, so that when you're walking, your minds, both of you, your minds are not going in the past. They're not going in the future. They're right in the present moment. And of course, you don't have to say anything out loud about the actual physical acts of walking, but you can also admire the beauty around you. It's about being in the now and what you're aware of in the now. We also want to overcome some obstacles to practicing in a mindful way for us to be resilient, of course. So discuss why it's hard for a person to pick up mindfulness practice. And, let's work to help people to stick to it and to say, all right, that practice was no good for you. Yes, I understand it's a little bit more difficult than some of the other things we've practiced together. So let's try to find something that you think would be easier for you to do at home. Maybe some of the things we've practiced here together, you can pick up and take that and do that at home. So making the time, simply taking time out to do this can be uncomfortable. We're always so busy, but we need to find time to take time out for this. We're always talking about taking time out for things like the gym. And you know what, taking time out to do meditation exercises as an example, which are sort of a subset of mindfulness, that we can make time for that. Some of that is 5 minutes. Some of it is less than 5 minutes. Pure mindfulness, saying in the moment, that's half a second. So there are ways that this can happen, and we'll go through some of that in a moment. It's important for us as clinicians to really validate a person's difficulty with mindfulness practice. A lot of people have difficulty. You may have difficulty with it. I know I did. And then do it in dosing effects. So little by little, help a person become more and more confident in their skills to be able to practice mindfulness. And difficulty can arise and open up to inner experiences. That's basically what we were talking about in terms of the trauma-sensitive mindfulness. So when things come up, to make sure, most importantly, that the person is feeling safe and that the material mentally and emotionally is being, how can I say this, that they're feeling it, they're thinking it, and they're feeling it. Once we start feeling those inner emotions, that's when we may get triggered. But we can also find inner resources to be able to deal with that, to sustain what we call distress tolerance, where there's a significant factor of mental health there. So being able to stay with the body more will increase over time. Instead of coming to the body, feeling the discomfort and pushing it away, you will learn the capacity to build in those internal controls and stay with the moment. Let me see if I can skip one of these two. You can suggest to build in structures as in other habits, and this is like really easy. So, every night we floss our teeth at the same time every night, or we do that in the morning at the same time every morning. There are pieces in our life where we create consistency. So you can stick a mindfulness exercise in there, whether it's the morning or the afternoon, or preferably both, preferably, several times throughout the day. But do it small steps at a time. There also can be social contact that's associated with mindfulness. Having a mindfulness buddy. I know a long time ago I had a buddy and we were doing dieting together. And we both did really, really well because we had each other and we were accountable to each other. So if someone can connect to a mindfulness buddy, someone that is just as interested and socially interested in creating that dual relationship, that's really important and helpful, as a person is accountable not just to themselves and maybe not just reporting out to you every time they see you once a week, but also that daily informal, right? We always want to make those informal connections for people to help them to build their informal resources. of course, it's also helpful if you practice mindfulness yourself, and so that you're sharing what your experiences have been. All right. What's the difference between mindfulness and meditation? Well, meditation refers to a formal exercise, and that formal exercise focuses on expanding our awareness, on calming our mind, creating inner peace. Meditation is intentional, and I think that's the most basic part of that. And with that comes a lot of exercise. And all those exercises you see right there, the breath, the scan, object meditation, guided imagery, mindful eating, that is meditation. But mindfulness is about being aware, paying attention to your thoughts, paying attention to your feelings, your behaviors, and your movements. We can do this informally, right? Just staring out the window of our office and all of a sudden admire X, Y, or Z, or, take stock in where you are now and give yourself some positive affirmations. Or it can be formally, and that's where these meditation exercises come in. Those are the formal aspects of mindfulness. So there's not a clear distinction, but just know that meditation involves an activity and mindfulness doesn't need to, but it can, and many people use that interchangeably. All right, so these are examples, and I wish I could go into each of these, but you're going to have many of these in the packet that you're able to download. You may not have mindful eating as I come to think back on that, but really just Google things that you want to look up, and you'd be able to get a lot of information on there, and many of them are at no cost to you. I love this. This is called loving kindness. It's also called metta meditation. And it's a great way to cultivate our propensity for kindness, and it involves mentally sending goodwill, kindness, and warmth towards other people. And it could be other people that you know and already have good feelings for, or the people that you do know that you do not have good feelings for, and even to those strangers. And the instruction guide for this exercise is also included in your toolkit, and I ask that you at least give it a shot. Now, I have a little story, as I always tend to do, but you've heard of paying it forward, I'm sure. So I was once in the drive-thru at Starbucks, and when it was my turn to pick up my venti and pay for my order, the waiter gladly told me that the person in front of me, so the car in front of me, paid for my coffee. I was so dumbstruck. That never happened to me before. I didn't even think to pay it forward myself, for which I regret to this day. But I realize now what he or she did, it was just as much for themselves as it was for me. They practiced loving kindness. And they had a life purpose and had life satisfaction, reduced depressed symptoms. They had love. They had compassion. They had joy. They had a social connection. And they were kind to me and kind to themselves. So I urge you to begin loving kindness meditation and assume your usual meditation posture. And we're not doing this whole thing right now, but just understand that it's this exercise. As it begins, you assume a posture. The first stage of it is to cultivate loving kindness towards yourself. The second is to expand that loving kindness to a good friend. The third is to expand loving kindness to a neutral person. The fourth is probably the most difficult stage, and it calls to cultivate loving kindness to a person that you do not have goodwill for. And then the fifth is the culmination of this practice. So in this stage, we extend our loving kindness to all sentient beings. And for all the stages, you can use mantras or statements. I prefer to use statements. Mantras to me are a little hokey. But there are statements out there you can use. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be at ease. Live with ease. May you be happy. May you be free from pain. May you create your own, to be in charge. And so feel free to try that. And again, that's in your packet. And then there's another one I want to do, and I'm going to run quickly through this, but it's journaling. You don't normally think of mindfulness and journaling, but it's directing your thoughts inward. That can be very difficult in a chaotic world, and our thoughts are always overflowing throughout the entire day, preventing us from really having those mindful moments. So we pick up journaling. I love this from Mina Murray. It's like whispering to oneself and listening at the same time. Journaling can help you focus your mind in the now. So take what research has shown us, that we're able to cultivate awareness through practice, and the journaling is practical. It will be your practice. You're physically doing something while you're focusing your mind on your day. And some people find it easier to be mindful than something to focus on, like a mantra or chocolate, rubber ball. That's me. I always find it easier when I'm concentrating on something tactile. And so do it in however it makes you feel best, but that experience is more real as you focus on the texture, the taste, the sounds, the smell, etc. of mindfulness, of that one moment. And so if you choose to journal, really there is no wrong way to journal. First and foremost, think back on your day. Simply, this isn't something you need if you don't want to carry around a journal with you, but essentially reflect on your day and think back on your day and simply write one or two things or two or three things that you found interesting about that day. Create mindful moment journal entries. So write down two or three of your awareness in the moment. Those portions of that one particular day where you felt present and aware. So you can choose that to do that in the moment, but the more and more you practice being present in the moment, you will be able to come back to your journal in the evenings, remember them, recall them, and write them down. Also, recurring themes. You'll identify your inner dialogue. For example, at work, you may have one task in which you don't feel capable, and what that does to our inner dialogue. We might be full of self-doubt or even self-criticizing ourselves. But by becoming mindful and aware of this, you delete the self-doubt, that you delete that inner dialogue, and you begin to plan. You begin to think of the moment, making today, right now, this moment the best. And also, how can you feel better about your work? What is it that you need? And that will help you get through the next day. And then making plans for that. That might be further education for yourself in a certain industry. That might be a conversation with your supervisor that you need more help in X, Y, or Z, or it really would be helpful for your success if they helped you with X, Y, or Z. And so there are all these different ways to use it. And lastly, use technology. Journal does not have to be pen and paper. There are some online apps, and one is called Calm. Calm is an app, and it has a lot of sort of nature sounds and calming music. They also have an online journal, which you could actually print out if that's what you wanted to do. But an actual online, all digital journal, one of them is Evernote. They also have a paper journal. A paper journal that I found, I don't know if it has a complimentary digital version, but I found it and it's just really wonderful. It's called The Law of Attraction, and that's also in your resources if you're interested in that, or you could just Google Law of Attraction Journal. And it's not just, it's a planner and a journal, but it's sort of a life fixer because it engages us in the process of planning, which is so important. How many times we as an organization, right, as a staff member in an organization, we help the organization plan the mission and the vision. We set big organizational goals. Well, the Law of Attraction Journal actually helps us to do that for ourselves. And it suggests, in terms of mindfulness, things to do daily: meditate daily, spend time in nature, accept and let go, take care of yourself, give back, and make sure you're entertained. Mindfulness and self-care for providers. We need to take care of ourselves. It was just in the news that burnout is a real thing. And I'm thinking, yeah, we know burnout is a real thing. And we need to take care of ourselves and have self-compassion. Other people are too critical, and we must not be critical of ourselves. We are good practitioners, and we get overwhelmed and we get burned out. And so we need to fill our own cup, like putting on that oxygen mask before we help others, like airplane safety. By learning mindfulness practice for ourselves in our own lives, we're going to be better able to service the other people that we work for. So we get more fulfillment from our work. We provide better quality care. In turn, the people we work with have better quality lives. So research has shown that employees and practitioners, mindfulness practice leads to greater performance and productivity, and that it enhances the provider-participant relationship when the provider is able to be more present with the individuals. So it's a win-win for everyone, and we already talked about EAP programs having this as part of their services to the staff. So let's go back a little bit to recovery and resiliency, and I'm sure we would all love to wake up each morning with the energy and confidence to respond to whatever life sends our way. Well, the good news is that mindfulness is perfect to design to show us how. So resilient people don't fall apart in the face of adversity. Instead, they become stronger as they face and they learn from it. So in the midst of many challenging situations, they tend to maintain positive attitudes, right? We talked about, we might know some of those people. They maintain positive mind states, particularly self-acceptance, and they stay open to finding the benefits and meaningful lessons of that experience in front of them. Now, we don't all come to this naturally, but by cultivating non-judgmental awareness of what's happening in the present, and both inside of us and outside of us, mindfulness meditation can help us develop those qualities. And it actually helps us to see clearly and to respond appropriately rather than for us to react. And that's something that we all, providers and the people that you work with, can absolutely benefit from, to take that nanosecond of time and have that training, the mindfulness training, kick in, and then that leads to us reacting differently as opposed to what typically has been our knee-jerk reaction. Every New Year's Eve, I say a little prayer that the coming year will give me love, health, and happiness. And that prayer is lovely. But in time, life happens. And when it does, we have a choice. The choice to wallow in the deepest depths of our despair or sorrow, or to use mindfulness to be in the present. And so remember that we have the power to find acceptance and love in the midst of whatever's going on. And I know it sounds bizarre, but I found out that when life happens, I actually take a moment or two or even a week or more, and I allow myself all of my negative feelings. I'm depressed. I'm mired in the emotional soup. And then I pick myself up. I practice being in the moment. I meditate, and I appreciate all that I am and all that I have. This is mindfulness. And in a way, having come out of the storm, allowing myself some time in that mess, I really appreciate the transformation out of it.
Yeah, great, Ruth. This is wonderful. It's already 1 o'clock. So I think we're running out of time. I just wanted to see if you had any last thoughts, and I want to apologize to everyone that we don't have enough time for Q&A. But did you have any last thoughts for our participants? Because I see a lot of people are logging off because it is 1 o'clock, and just want to give you
it is 1
a chance
o'clock,
for
and I understand.
last thoughts.
Yeah, I did want to practice with you, but, we don't have time for that. But I want you to Google guided meditation. I was going to present a beach guided meditation. It is highly relaxing if you enjoy all things beaches, as I do. So look that up and walk yourself through that. There's many of them out there that are free.
Okay, thank you everyone for participating. Ruth, any last thoughts? Can you move the slides down for just upcoming events really quickly?
Absolutely. Oh, just quickly, these are the apps, just some of the apps that are available. And that's a list of the toolkit, all the things that we are providing for you that you can download right now. I'd love to know the answer to this. Maybe sometime I'd know. Thank you so much. And here goes the upcoming events. Kara?
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone. These are our upcoming events: Engaging Youth at Risk for Psychoses on Thursday, June 13th at 1 p.m. And then we have Complex Trauma Throughout the Lifespan, Considerations for Practice to Support Healthy Aging on June 26th at 1:30. Thank you so much for participating with us. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge around mindfulness. We did have a few questions. Is it okay if people reach out to you separately with some of their questions, since we didn't get a chance to do
absolutely.
Today? Can you forward the slide up? Yeah, you could move the slide up just one so they can see your email.
Okay, there it is.
There we go.
I forgot it was there. Yeah, so please feel free to reach out to me. Send me email, send me questions, send me smart questions, send me dumb questions, send me all questions. And
great,
we'll get back
thank you.
to you.
There was a great question around telomeres and mindfulness, and it makes me think that maybe we could do a neurobiology kind of component for another webinar in the future around mindfulness. So thank you, everyone, for your participation, and thanks again, Ruth. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye,
you
everyone.
Too.
Okay,
bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.